We need more understanding of human nature, because the only real danger that exists is man himself.
One thing is certain, a great change in our psychological attitude is imminent. Why? Because we need more understanding of human nature. The only real danger that exists is man himself. He is the great danger, and we are pitifully unaware of it. We know so little about ourselves, and this ignorance is where all future evil originates. Have you ever felt like something inside you is holding you back, sabotaging your best efforts? What if I told you there's a hidden side of your personality, lurking in the shadows, influencing your every move? This hidden side is what Carl Jung calls the shadow. The shadow is a part of our unconscious mind that contains all the aspects of ourselves we reject or deny, including repressed desires, instincts, weaknesses, and parts of our personality we consider negative or undesirable. These hidden traits influence our behavior and emotions in ways we often do not realize. To truly understand the impact of the shadow, let's delve deeper into how it forms and affects our lives. Jung tells us in his collected works, Psychology and Religion, that man is not as good as he imagines or wants to be. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in our conscious life, the darker and denser it becomes. If we are aware of our shortcomings, we have a chance to correct them. But if they are repressed and isolated from our consciousness, they never get corrected and may suddenly burst forth in a moment of unawareness. Ultimately, this creates an unconscious barrier, undermining even our best intentions, often revealed through meaningful coincidences or synchronicities. The shadow forms through societal norms, personal experiences, and repression. From a young age, we learn which behaviors, thoughts, and emotions are unacceptable to our family and society, pushing these traits into our unconscious mind. For example, a child told that anger is bad might repress their anger, making it part of their shadow. The shadow holds various qualities, strengths, and potentials. If left unexplored, these aspects can lead to a diminished personality, creating unconscious obstacles that hinder the development and expression of these positive traits. Understanding that everyone carries a shadow helps us recognize its profound impact on our lives. Now that we've introduced the concept, let's delve deeper into the different types of shadows. The ego is supposed to represent the real person, but in cases where part of our personality is unknown to us.
Well, you see, the ego is supposed to be the representative of the real person. But as I say, for instance, in the case where B knows of A, but A doesn't know of B, in that case, one would say the ego is more on the side of C, because the ego has a more complete knowledge, and A is a split-off personality.
The ego may not fully represent our true self. When Jung refers to the self, he means a personality that is more complete than the ego. The ego consists of what we are consciously aware of, but the self includes both our conscious and unconscious elements. Jung reflects on his own capacity for violence and aggression during his youth. He acknowledges his strong emotions and physical capabilities, but also his fear of losing control, leading him to avoid situations that could provoke violent behavior. Now that we understand the basic concept of the shadow, let's explore Jung's model of the psyche further. The persona is a practical concept we need to understand people's relationships. The persona is partially the result of societal demands and partially a compromise with how one likes to appear. However, the persona is not the real personality, despite people insisting it is real and honest. The performance of the persona is fine as long as you know that you are not identical with how you appear. In Jung's model of the psyche, there are various structures that interact with one another in our inner world. Two of these, the persona and the anima animus, are relational. The persona relates to the external world, and the anima animus relates to the internal world. The ego, which is primarily body-based and can be seen as the executive part of the personality, stands alongside the shadow. Together, the ego and the shadow are central to our identity. The anima is the feminine aspect present in the unconscious of men. It represents the inner feminine side and influences men's interactions with women and their own emotional life. Its opposite, the animus, is the masculine aspect present in the unconscious of women. It represents the inner masculine side and influences women's interactions with men and their own assertiveness and reasoning. To understand how our unconscious mind shapes our reality, let's hear from Jung on the interplay between personal and collective shadows.
The psyche has two conditions, two important conditions. The one is the environmental influence, and the other is the given fact of the psyche as it is formed. The self is really a term that designates the whole personality, because the whole personality of man is indescribable.
The self is really a term that designates the whole personality. The unconscious cannot be described because it is always unconscious, so we don't fully know our unconscious personality. Despite occasional insights, our unconscious remains largely unknown to us. Jung emphasizes that our psyche is shaped by both environmental influences and inherent psychological factors present from birth.
Well, chiefly his purely personal approach and his disregard of the historical conditions of man. You see, we depend largely upon our history. We are shaped through education, through the influence of the parents, which are by no means always personal. They were prejudiced or they were influenced by historical ideas or what I call dominance.
He discusses his disagreement with an approach that focuses solely on personal aspects of psychology, neglecting historical and collective influences. Our psyche is significantly shaped by historical context, parental influence, and societal norms, which are deeply ingrained and impact our psychological development. Let's now take a closer look at the personal shadow. Jung says that the dark characteristics that constitute the shadow have an emotional nature, a kind of autonomy, and a possessive quality. These are usually aspects of the personality we try to hide, repress, and deny to ourselves and others because they are traits we wish not to have. Failing to recognize and deal with our shadow can lead to significant problems. Think about a time when you felt an intense, irrational emotion. Was it really about what was happening at that moment, or was it something deeper? The shadow is most visible when we are in the grip of anxiety or other emotions. For example, under the influence of alcohol, one might suddenly blurt out a hostile remark during a friendly conversation. When we do not want to assimilate what we despise, we project it onto others. Many people refuse to recognize their shadow so completely that the ego is not even aware of shadow behavior and has no possibility of controlling it. Under these conditions, the shadow is autonomous and may express itself in inexplicable moods, irritability, and cruelty.
And so the psychical events are facts, are realities. And when you observe the stream of images within, you observe an aspect of the world within. Because the psyche, you know, if you understand it as a phenomenon that takes place in so-called living bodies, then it is a quality of matter. As our body consists of matter, we discovered that this matter has another aspect, namely a psychic aspect.
We had a patient in the ward who was quiet but completely dissociated, a schizophrenic. He had been in the clinic for over 20 years. He came to the clinic as a young man, a little uneducated with no particular background. One day I came to the ward, and he was obviously excited. He called me over, grabbed my coat's lapel and led me to the window. He said, "Now you must see. Look up at the sun and see how it moves. You must move your head too like this, and then you will see the rays of the sun. You know, that's the origin of the wind. See how the sun moves as you move your head from one side to the other." Of course, I didn't understand at all. I thought, there you are, he's just crazy. But that case stayed in my mind. 4 years later, I came across a paper written by a German author who dealt with the so-called Mithras liturgy, a part of the great Parisian sorcerer Pappus's teachings. In the paper, he described a ritual where, after the second prayer, you would see the disk of the sun unfold and see a tube hanging down from it, which is the origin of the wind. And when you move your face towards the east, the sun would follow, and when you move your face towards the west, it would follow too. Instantly I knew this was the vision my patient had. But how could you be sure that your patient wasn't unconsciously recalling something that someone had told him? Oh no, it was quite out of the question because that information was not known at the time. It was in a magic papyrus in Paris, and it wasn't even published yet. It was only published 4 years after I observed it with my patient. This wasn't proof to me, but it was a hint, and I took it as such. These examples are crucial because they highlight Carl Jung's deep understanding of the unconscious mind and how it affects our behavior and perceptions. By showing that fantasies and dreams have a tangible reality, Jung stresses that the unconscious is not just a storage place for forgotten or repressed thoughts. Instead, it is an active and powerful part of our psyche that significantly shapes our experiences and actions. This helps us understand that our inner world is just as real and influential as the external world we see around us. Throughout his writings, Jung emphasizes the importance of developing awareness of the shadow in psychotherapy and its projections in an individual's life. Although the shadow is usually perceived as negative, it can also be positive. In fact, exploring our shadow gives us access to many positive qualities. Jung explains this with quotes from his collected works in Volume 9, Part 2. The first of these is the shadow, that hidden, repressed, often inferior and guilt-laden part of the personality whose roots stretch back into the realm of our animal ancestors and encompass the whole historical aspect of the unconscious. If it has been believed so far that the human shadow is the source of evil, it can now be confirmed upon closer investigation that the unconscious man, that is, his shadow, does not consist only of morally reprehensible tendencies, but also displays a number of good qualities such as normal instincts, appropriate reactions, realistic insights, creative impulses, and so on. A man is not complete if he is not conscious of that aspect of things. You see, a man is not complete when he lives in a world of statistical truth. He must live in a world of his biological truth, that is, his biological truth that is not merely superficial. It is the expression of what he truly is, what he feels himself to be. These explanations highlight Jung's views on the shadow and the self, emphasizing the importance of acknowledging and integrating all aspects of our personality to achieve psychological wholeness. One of Jung's closest collaborators, Marie-Louise von Franz, writes in Man and His Symbols, Part 3, the process of individuation, the realization of the shadow. The shadow is not necessarily always an opponent. In fact, he is exactly like any human being with whom one has to get along, sometimes by giving in, sometimes by resisting, sometimes by giving love, whatever the situation requires. The shadow becomes hostile only when he is ignored or misunderstood.
But the personal shadow is the personal shortcomings of things which every human being could be conscious of, which is not archetypal and therefore not a mystery. For instance, such things as greed for money or jealousy. Jealousy is one of the main aspects of the shadow.
In practical life, shadows emerge. But the personal shadow is the personal shortcomings, things that every human being could be conscious of, which are not archetypal and therefore not mysterious. For instance, such things as greed for money or jealousy. Jealousy is one of the main aspects of the shadow, or laziness, sloppiness, unrelatedness, sentimentality, and other inferiorities that everyone has, but prefers not to know about. As for the personal nature of the unconscious, the personal quality of the unconscious in a given case, where you take an extroverted person, his unconscious has then an introverted quality because all the extroverted qualities are played out in consciousness. And it was these qualities that gave me a lead in the diagnostic value. It helped me to understand my patients. Both Marie-Louise von Franz and Carl Jung stress that acknowledging, understanding, and integrating the shadow, a complex emotional and personal part of our unconscious, is essential for achieving psychological wholeness and self-awareness. To better understand this, let's visualize the shadow. Imagine your shadow as a dark figure following you around. At first it seems intimidating, but as you turn to face it, you realize it's just a part of you that needs understanding and compassion. For instance, a person might believe that being assertive is rude or aggressive, losing the qualities of confidence and the ability to speak up for himself in an honest and respectful way. This may lead to less proactivity, making it more difficult to get a raise or job promotion, struggling with money, and so on. So when a person encounters an assertive person, deep down he feels resentment and guilt, which makes his shadow blacker and denser. These valuable aspects ought to be assimilated into actual experience and not repressed. It is up to the ego to give up its pride because the unconscious is in a compensatory relation to consciousness. After a while, you get the full picture, and if you have the full picture and the necessary moral stamina, then you can be cured. But in the end, it is a moral task. It is the manifestation of the situation of the unconscious, looking back from the unconscious. To put this into practice, let's talk about actionable advice for shadow work. To start your own shadow work, try keeping a journal. Write down moments when you felt a strong emotional reaction and reflect on what might have caused it. Over time, you'll start to see patterns that reveal your hidden shadow. Observe your emotional reactions throughout the day. When you notice a strong reaction, take a moment to pause and ask yourself what triggered it. Write down your observations to identify patterns. We also encounter our shadow in our dreams, often as a person of the same sex as the dreamer. It appears as a criticism of our character from the unconscious, an inner judge of your own being that reproaches you, usually leading to embarrassed silence. We must identify the contents of the shadow and integrate them into our personality. It is a common observation that when you talk to an individual, and this individual gives you insight into their inner preoccupations, interests and emotions, they hand over their personal complexes. Then you slowly and surely get into the situation of being a sort of authority, a point of reference. Jung suggests that by confronting and integrating our shadow, we can transform these repressed aspects into a source of inner authority and self-awareness, becoming a point of reference for our own personal growth. Let's now explore how to integrate shadow aspects into our lives through the analysis of dreams. For instance, you become acquainted with the contents of the unconscious. This is the process of the realization of the shadow, also known as shadow work. Here begins the painful and lengthy work of self-education. One must enter into long and difficult negotiations with the shadow, a work that can be compared to the psychological equivalent of the labors of Sisyphus. Through shadow work, one can observe one's shadow outwardly by watching one's emotional reactions and being radically honest about one's interactions with others, and inwardly by exploring one's dreams. Before we delve into the fascinating ways our shadow manifests in our lives, let's first understand how this hidden aspect intricately weaves into the very fabric of our identity. In Carl Jung's collected works, Volume 13, Alchemical Studies, Jung tells us that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The latter procedure, however, is unpleasant and therefore not popular. With a deeper understanding of our identity, it's time to witness the shadow in action. Let's explore how this concealed part of ourselves manifests in everyday behaviors and decisions. Understanding our shadow is crucial, but it doesn't have to be a daunting task. It can be a fascinating journey of self-discovery. This allows one to become enlightened and reduces the shadow's destructive potential, not so much by waging war against the darkness, but by bringing the darkness to light. From Carl Jung's collected works, Volume 12, Psychology and Alchemy, there is no light without shadow and no psychic wholeness without imperfection. However scary or dark it is to confront our shadow, finding truth brings relief. Discernment of the truth is the process of authenticity, a painstaking excavation into the depths of our being to explore possibilities and limitations, distortions, the buried and often forgotten parts of ourselves and abilities. Most people, however, are too lazy to think deeply about even those moral aspects of their behavior of which they are conscious, let alone to consider how the unconscious affects them. Here's another actionable step you can take. In your daily interactions, practice being radically honest with yourself. If you feel irritation or discomfort, reflect on whether these feelings might be related to your shadow. Look for synchronicities that may provide insights. Now that we've covered the personal shadow, let's explore the collective shadow. The shadow can also consist of factors that stem from a source outside the individual's personal life. This is when we encounter the collective shadow, the dark side, or the unknown or little-known aspects of a society and culture. It consists of what opposes our shared and collective values. To understand this better, let's look at the broader implications of the collective shadow. The collective shadow is like a stream of archetypal ideas that flows through individuals across centuries. It comes to light in major events, such as political or spiritual movements. For example, before the Reformation, people dreamt of a great change, and that's why such great transformations could be predicted. If someone had been clever enough to see what was going on in people's unconscious minds, they would have been able to predict it. For instance, I predicted the Nazi rise in Germany through the observation of my German patients. They had dreams in which the whole thing was anticipated in considerable detail. The collective shadow, a vast and often horrifying aspect of human life, inflicts immense harm on both humanity and the natural world, leaving lasting effects across generations. It manifests through projected darkness, violence, oppression and denial of responsibility. It emerges in wars, genocides and cultural destruction. This pervasive yet elusive force breeds atrocities, persecution and widespread suffering, hiding under seemingly benevolent actions like language enforcement. Outwardly, it shows as physical suffering, poverty and crime, while inwardly it fosters self-hatred, depression and a desire for revenge, causing others to endure similar suffering. Let's dive deeper into the collective shadow and its relation to evil. The collective shadow has long been labeled as evil, akin to the devil in Christian tradition, where possession strips away one's humanity, replacing it with a demonic nature. For Jung, the primary response to such evil lies in the relentless quest for self-knowledge and wholeness. Each individual must recognize the full spectrum of their capabilities, knowing both the extent of the good they can achieve and the potential crimes they are capable of committing. Every society has collective problems, collective convictions, and so on. Now we are very much influenced by them because we belong to certain political parties, certain beliefs, and that can be a serious collective shadow. A serious determinant of your behavior is that as long as a personal conflict doesn't touch upon it, there's no question, it doesn't appear. But the moment you move beyond your personal sphere and face impersonal determinants, like a political or social issue that really matters to you, you are confronted with a collective problem. This is when you encounter collective issues. When a significant issue is present in a particular society, it can be called a shadow issue if there is evidence of denial, projection, and a lack of individual and collective responsibility. Taking responsibility, morally, politically, and spiritually, is crucial. The courage to face our darkness frees others from having to carry it for us. For example, let's discuss dealing with the past and taking responsibility in response to massive historical suffering, such as wars, genocides, holocausts, and ongoing oppression. Denial, often linked to a desire to move on and leave the past behind, is the most common and usually the first reaction. Many attempts have been made to address painful pasts through public apologies, repentance, reparation payments, and pilgrimages to places of suffering. But how do we integrate the shadow deeply and broadly within a population, rather than just symbolically through leaders or policies? Remembering and speaking about the unspeakable is a painful process for victims, perpetrators, bystanders, and witnesses. This process is successful or reasonably complete once pain, outrage, betrayal, suffering, and other feelings have been voiced, heard, and responsibility has been taken. Truth-telling is both the most desirable and feasible way to deal with a difficult past. The world hangs on a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man. Imagine if certain people in Moscow lost their nerve or common sense for just a moment. The whole world could be in fire and flames. Nowadays, we are not threatened by natural catastrophes. Those are all man-made. We are the great danger. The psyche is the great danger. What if something goes wrong with the psyche? This has shown us just how powerful the psyche of man is and how important it is to understand it. But we know very little about it, and most people wouldn't believe that the psychological processes of the ordinary person have any real importance. One example of a terrible mass psychosis, represented by the collective shadow, is systemic racism and police brutality, where deep-seated prejudices and personal biases escalate into widespread discrimination and violence. Ordinary people, under certain conditions, may participate in or support actions they wouldn't normally consider. The personal shadow is the bridge to the collective shadow. Thus, resolving one's inner conflicts or personal shadow is crucial to avoid unconsciously falling into the collective shadow, which often reveals itself through synchronicities. By doing so, one can influence others and benefit society as a whole. If a patient reaches the point where their conflict becomes very serious, their mind might suffer, and then they could face a collective issue. The question is, How can we face the collective shadow? We must first confront our personal shadow by engaging in thorough and challenging self-examination, being truthful in our interactions, monitoring our emotional responses, and analyzing our dreams. This process prevents us from becoming victims of our shadow and unconscious projections, allowing us to uncover and harness the positive traits within us, ultimately enriching our lives and those around us. By acknowledging the collective shadow, we can avoid its influence and take responsibility for addressing ignored issues. Without personal and collective action, embracing our darkness with courage not only brings relief to others but also ensures that we confront and rectify the past, preventing the shadow from intensifying and history from repeating itself. And as for those who call me a mystic, they're just mistaken. They don't understand the first thing about reality. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I really appreciate your time and I want to thank you for watching. Please share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to donate a coffee to keep good karma sending love and blessings. Namaste.